days together with you at this blockchain conference. Sounds strange. Whoops. What's going on? Is it my fault? No? Strange. Where's it coming from? Do you want me to speak without the mic? Maybe you just switch it.
Sorry for that. Okay, so now let's kick off this conference without any technical problems anymore. Glad that you're here. I'd like to welcome all of you, and my name is Sebastian Mein. I'm from S&S Media. We are a conference organizer and a media publisher, mainly in Germany, but we also do English language stuff. We run lots of conferences. Maybe you know our Basta conference, our JAX conference series, our International JavaScript Conference series. Last year in this building we started our very first machine learning conference, and we do many more conferences, and this time it's all about the blockchain. Now I got two things to handle here. When we were starting to think about this conference, we said, okay, there's lots of events over there which are really going to hype everything around the blockchain. You know, all this notion about this is changing the world, this is disrupting almost everything. So in the sense of blockchain, this is the solution for almost every given problem. And maybe you should ask, okay, what was the problem before you talk about the solution? And in this sense, we also need to talk about the limitation of a technology, which is fascinating. But we said with this conference, we don't want to get onto this train. Although we are fascinated by blockchain technologies, we really want to get the feet on the earth and really think about what is possible today. Where are reasonable use cases where blockchain might be an interesting and an attractive solution or an interesting option. That's what we'd like to talk about here. And secondly, as I already said, we are a technology conference. So this conference is all about a focus on technology, and we know from your registrations, there's an interesting mix of folks here as an attendance. So on the one hand, we got developers in the room, and the other hand, we got lots of head of innovations from different companies, etc. But in the end, everybody here in the room is focused on tech. That makes the thing really interesting and really unique, and it differentiates this conference from many other conferences which are out there and deal with blockchain stuff. Having said that, I'd like to introduce first of all Ingo Rammer. He is our major advisor, and we really sat together and talked very much about blockchain and how this conference could be shaped. And I've learned personally so much from him and from our conversation. First of all, please give a hand to Ingo Rammer. And he's going to be our very first keynote, but before I announce him, I'd like to explain that he's co-founder of the company called Think Texture. We know each other for, let's say, 15 years for many different conferences we've been running together. His focus has always been on different technologies, but mainly on business-to-business cases. He is active in different standard bodies and open source projects around blockchain technologies, namely the Hyperledger project, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and also he's in a standardization body, and to be honest, I cannot remind this by heart. It's the ICO TC307. This is about distributed ledger technologies and blockchains, and he's there, the German expert, as I've learned. Yeah? Okay, Ingo is really deep into that kind of technology, but before we get into your keynote, yesterday over a couple of beer we developed a very scientific model, our blockchain maturity model, in order to learn where you are standing. And our basic idea was really to make a little fun and ask you to show up your hand if you are a novice. So really, maybe you've read some articles, or maybe you've read a book, and you are here to learn a little bit more. or you're more kind of the enthusiast person. You already did your private pet projects, you experiment around a little bit and really got your hands already dirty on some blockchain stuff. Maybe you belong to that group, you're already working on a proof of concept inside your company and you do some research and development. Maybe you already belong to that group. This is the 4 coolness rating. The POC, you already deployed something. And last but not least, of course, maybe you already developed a product which is live and in production already. So please show up. Would you think you are the 1-star coolness factor in sense of blockchain? Please raise your hand, don't be shy. Okay, great. Then secondly, you belong to this two coolness factor enthusiast group. Nice, okay. POC, research and development? Okay, that's the majority. Then POC, already deployed something. Oh, whoa. Okay. And last but not least, number 5, you have a product already running. Okay.
That's great, that's what we hope for. This distribution is exactly what we hope for and what we plan.
Absolutely. So this is really interesting, and the good thing about conferences is also it's not only the presentations you got, but it's also the coffee, the food, and the beer, and the opportunities to talk to each other and talk to your peers and really getting deeply into conversations and learn from each other. So having said this, I'd like to pass over. So this is going to the keynote, which is Ingo going to deliver in a second. But before you start, I'm stealing you some more time because I'd really like to ask you to download the Blockchain Tech Conference app. Yeah, so this is a search term in the app stores. This really helps you to have the latest version of the program there in case there are any updates of the program during the conference. Yeah, everything is going to be updated there in time. You got really the latest news if you use the app, which runs on iOS and Android. And this is also important because this is your way to give feedback. So if you're using the app, you can rate all the sessions and all the keynotes and all the workshops you're seeing here. And your feedback, of course, is really appreciated because we are going to forward it to all of our speakers. And of course, for us, it's also interesting to learn what you liked and what we could maybe do a little bit better even the next time. Last but not least, of course, this conference is going to be in this room. This is Saal A, and over there, this is Saal B. These are the 2 rooms of the conference, and you find all the catering stuff in this direction over there, coffee breaks, and right a little bit far more to the right from my perspective. And if you're leaving the room, there's also the lunch break. So everything is happening on this floor of the hotel. So, having said this, I'd really like to hand over. Okay, now we need to switch the slides to Ingo. And again, the idea of your keynote really was to get into this, to introduce into this conference and really to make understand, okay, what's the narrative, what we were thinking about this conference and how we were, especially you, thinking about the potentials and the current state of the blockchain technologies. Yeah. Thank you very much, and happy to listen to your keynote.
Thank you, Sebastian. So welcome, good morning. I'm really happy that so many people turned up for this conference. I've worked with Sebastian for, when did we start conceive this conference? It was quite a while ago. And we were really hoping that we get a community like you are, a primarily technical company into this at the conference. You know, there are so many conferences which are ICO focused and hype focused, and I love blockchain technology for the technology. I'm not very much into cryptocurrency and into investments. I don't own cryptocurrency. I've never had many, apart from what I needed to simulate transactions or to run a few transactions. Okay, what I'd like to talk about today is I'd like to talk about the status quo, where we are today. I'd like to talk about changes which are happening and which have happened over the last few years, or the last maybe 1 and 2 years, so things which are currently moving and which will move in the next 1 or 2 years. And I'd like to talk mainly, at the end, about 3 triggers. And these are 3 triggers which I think will change the adoption rate of blockchain technology. Because today, we have there is one killer app on public blockchains. And the killer app of a public blockchain today is investment, or speculation rather. That's the main killer app. We haven't seen too many other successful apps. And I think there are 3 triggers. And if these 3 things happen, not at the same time, but one after the other, this will change rapidly. That's how we get retail adoption of these technologies. Okay, so let's start with the status quo. Where are we today? We are, well, I think we are here at the right time to have these discussions. 2 years ago, the technology, the maturity of the technology was still quite a bit different from where it is today. There's still a lot moving, of course, but I think it's a great place to start looking into blockchain technologies or to work on learning about this and to build knowledge. A lot of people these days, or for the last few years actually, work on a very big vision of decentralization. Because that's essentially what blockchain technology is about. We are talking about decentralization. So what is this big vision? Well, or what is this decentralization? Well, so what we get from decentralization, of course, today when we look at it is from a business to business point of view, we get some kind of efficiency. So if you look at blockchain, at private blockchains especially, like the Fabric blockchains, which you'll see sessions maybe later on, these are all about business to business efficiency. That's nice. It's nice to get companies to share a certain view of data, to have a common view of their data without manual reconciliation at a later stage. But that's not what the dreamers envisioned. You know, the creators of Bitcoin or Ethereum, they didn't get up one morning and said, oh, I want to increase the efficiency of certain business processes by 2%. Now, some companies care a lot about the 2% improvement in efficiency, but that's not the reason why people started this. So what other reasons do we have? Well, there's another reason, which is safety. Decentralization can give us a certain level of safety in our lives, not just in a business-to-business scenario. One of my favorite cases in this environment is the fact that the World Health Organization today assumes that 66% of medication is faked. So when you go to a hospital, globally, you have a 66% chance of not getting the treatment you should get. And of course, in Central Europe, it's different. Now, we are very safe here in Central Europe, but if you look into Asia, Latin America, or Africa, the situation might be different. If you go to one of these countries, you might have a 90+% chance that the cancer treatment you are getting is absolutely ineffective in the best case. In the worst case, it causes harm. And that's a serious problem. And you know, finding a solution for this is not easy. Countries develop independent regulation in these environments, but there are a lot of projects trying to push towards some kind of global sharing of provenance information inside of the medical industry, starting from the chemicals which are input into the first process stages to produce the medication, to the whole distribution, repackaging, remixing chain until it reaches the end of, well, basically the hospital or the doctor giving you the medication. So that's one thing, and this is one of the things the visionaries behind this technology want to push or want to support. What else do we have? Something which might be closer to ourselves. One of the key drivers is sovereignty of your data. You know, in the current regulation with GDPR, we have now forced big platforms to give us at least access to our own data, but they still control the data. That's why we need this regulation. So you don't control your data, even with GDPR. Platforms control your data. Facebook controls your data. Amazon controls your data. eBay controls your rating. You're a good seller or a good buyer. That's a rating which you cannot port over to any other platform. eBay owns it. You can do a GDPR request to eBay to give you all the data, but you cannot transfer it to another platform. So you don't own the data. eBay owns the data. And that's true for every platform you're using. And that's something which is a driving force. People want to change this. Essentially, when we're talking about the visionaries and what they want to achieve, they want to give you more freedom by means of decentralization. Okay, but that's the vision, that's the dream. There's something we must not forget at the current time, because we sometimes forget this. When I'm talking about these use cases with CTOs or CEOs or other executives, they tend to believe a lot into the hype and into the vision, and they think that this is something we are about to solve in a year or something like this. And that's rather, the first points, they were rather things which we are going to solve in maybe 10 years. So we must never forget the maturity level of the technology. And one of the key developers of Ethereum posted this on his Twitter feed last year. At that time, Ethereum had an approximate market capitalization token value of 70 to 80 billion US dollars. You know, if a key developer of Amazon would post something like this, do not use Amazon, it's not safe and secure and scalable, AWS, that's going to be a disaster. Now, but he posted this. So that's quite interesting. It turns out that this is more a statement about any public blockchain. And actually, Vlad clarified this on the day after, because you can imagine if you put a statement like this out for something which is the equivalent of an $80 billion company, there will be some interesting backlash. And so he wrote a long post the day after and he said, well, you know, I wasn't talking about Ethereum. I was talking about the fact that we all are learning. We have no answers. Nobody in the community, no other blockchain has answers. He said, I still believe that Ethereum might be the best blockchain, of course, otherwise I wouldn't work here, but we have a number of issues which we need to solve. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind. Today, everybody is learning. We are in an early stage. All the creators of public chains are still learning. If there is one person or if there is a public chain out there which tells you that we have solved all the problems, they are quite likely lying to you. Or they are deluded and think that they really did. That's why I like to pick the Ethereum chain because or as an example, because the Ethereum developers are very honest developers. They are very open about the level of research they are doing, whereas other chains are more business focused. They are more into like selling as if it were a stable product. And so that's something we need to keep in mind. All these things are evolving. Today we see a slightly different stage with private chains. The space in private chains is a lot more well known and analyzed, and so we see more stability in the development of private chain technologies like Fabric or maybe Quorum, but those are of course used mainly in B2B scenarios, so they only solve for efficiency. They are not really solving the dream yet. But I think that's as a business, when you're not into retail customers, when you're looking into B2B optimizations, this might be a nice starting point in most cases. However, the whole discussion of private blockchain versus public blockchain, are we looking to create our own network or are we looking to use an existing network, is a discussion which we are leading today. It's not a discussion which we'll be leading in a few years in the future, because those things will converge. That's a development which has started about 2 years ago in earnest, that we see a lot of convergence projects. And at the end, we might end up with large blockchains like Ethereum, or like replacements of Ethereum in this case, upon which we have a lot of private chains hanging off. So you have a large chain which synchronizes private chains with the guarantees you get from private chains today. However, when I talk about this with technologists or business owners, I realize that that's something we need to educate people about. So we need to learn this. We as technologists, I think we have a duty to learn and educate our peers, our technical stakeholders, our non-technical stakeholders, our executives, our users and our customers. Because that's something which, it's not common knowledge. A lot of people in the blockchain space look at it at a very specific niche. So you have people who only look at public chains. I talk to people who have never seen a private chain. And the other is true as well. There are people who look into private chains and say, oh, I don't think public chains will ever do what we need to do. They will converge, but we need to track this. Okay. What else do we need to discuss? Whenever we talk about blockchains, there is one thing, I don't know if you know this, I assume that half of you raised your hands so that you are developing POCs or have them in production. you know, when you go to your friends and tell them about this, there is usually the inevitable one who says, how can you do this? Even though you know that this technology is wasting energy, it's destroying our planet in the long term, it's non-sustainable, how can you advocate blockchain? At least that's what happened to me. And I think that's something where we also need to spend time to learn and educate other people, to share the information, because what few people realize is that if you look at the total energy use of, let's say, a Bitcoin or an Ethereum block, of the block creation, then the majority of energy is wasted to answer the question, who can create the next block? Hardly any energy is wasted to actually process the transactions in the block. And this is true for Bitcoin, that's true for Ethereum, that's true for all proof of work or mining-based chains. In fact, the orders of magnitudes don't match. If I would have drawn this to scale, we wouldn't have seen the watt part, because processing the transactions is not what's wasting the energy. Finding out who can create the next block is wasting the energy. So as a society, as a global society, not just technologists, we need to solve this problem so that we can talk more about that problem. Okay? Now, this problem is a problem a number of chains are working on. And there are different approaches to solve this without energy consumption. There are different so-called consensus systems or consensus algorithms apart from proof of work, the classic Nakamoto consensus, which we know from Bitcoin and Ethereum. And so you have ideas like proof of stake, or I don't know, even delegated proof of stake. Intel has an idea, proof of elapsed time, etc. So there are different ideas. We don't know the answer yet. Everybody is learning. But it's important to realize that proof of work chains, as we know them today, might go away at some point in time. In fact, Ethereum, from the very early days, had the plan to eventually move away from proof of work. They have explicitly created a difficulty bomb, as they called it, which would slow down the Ethereum network if they didn't move away from proof of work at some certain point in time. They have delayed it in the meantime, but they are actively working on. And that's one of the things Vlad has referred to in his 2017 post. Because what he basically meant is, we are not there yet, but all of our team is working on these things. And that's also something where we as technologists need to talk about. That's something which is not very well known. A lot of people who are outside of tech, when you talk about blockchain, the first thing they know is, well, they know about ICO hypes and scams, and they know about the energy consumption of blockchain. And they are worried about this, rightly so. Okay, so I'm talking a lot about learning and educating. If you look at this conference, you'll see that we have selected talks for all these different areas I've just mentioned. You'll see talks, and this is only a subset. You'll see talks which go more towards the public chains surrounding Ethereum, the decentralized applications on Ethereum, and the whole vision of public chains. You'll see talks on private chains like Fabric or Sawtooth, which are two private chains coming from the Hyperledger project. You'll see talks on convergence. That's actually one of the topics I would definitely watch within the next few years. There's a speaker from Parity, which is a company based in Berlin actually, and they are actively working on a system which will over time allow private and public chains to converge. And there are only one player in this market, of course. And you have sessions on different ways of achieving consensus without this large proof of work part which consumes all the energy. And one of them is IOTA, which is not 100% the blockchain. It's a different way of achieving a distributed ledger. And if you're interested in this, I would recommend to also look into these sessions maybe. So what else is changing? Well, I think that we have quite a fast pace in technology, and we have quite a fast pace in blockchain especially, but this pace will not slow down. In fact, I think that we will get, within the next 1 or 2 years, we will see a lot of new public chains pop up. The reason is simply that they got ICO funding within the last 1 or 2 years, and they are now, well, more or less reaching their timeline, or they are a bit beyond their original timeline, but they are about to go into production within the next 1 or 2 years. And so we have a lot more options in the public space, and there will also be a lot more technologies in the private space. I get from our clients we talk with, I end up with about a new white paper every 1 or 2 weeks about a new private blockchain technology which nobody has heard about. But some of them will be very successful, some of them not, of course. I think that choice in technology is generally a good thing. We'll also see specialized blockchain tools like IOTA, which I managed before, which is created for a very specific use case to allow high transaction counts in IoT environments. And we'll see other blockchains optimizing for specific cases. However, while choice is good, we have to realize one thing. Few of these technologies will remain. Most of them will die. Because there is quite likely, at least that's my assumption, quite likely no place for, let's say, 50 different implementations of the same idea. It's better if we concentrate on a few of them, and that's what history has always taught us. Over time, we'll converge into a handful of competing technologies which solve a similar problem in a slightly different way. I don't think that 50 projects will remain. I guess you sense a theme here, because I also believe that we as technologists need to tell this. Because our business stakeholders, when they approach us as developers, they expect us to make a technology decision which will be valid in 10 years. And on blockchain tech, we need to tell them that this is not possible. The space is moving way too quickly. Projects start and die. If your business stakeholders ask you to pick the tech which will be the best one in 10 years, you can't. So we can be open about this with our stakeholders, or we can hide the fact. This depends on your environment, of course. But I think we as developers or technical people, we need to be aware of this. So what are the changes on the business side, apart from these changes on the tech side? So on the business side, I think, and that's going to be interesting, I think companies need to learn an interesting fact. And this is that with blockchains, the value creation happens at the edge of the network, not at the center of the network. And that's interesting, because companies have learned for the last 10 or 15 years that creating a platform is what's valuable. You know, at least since the start of the Apple App Store, a lot of clients we worked with said, oh, we want to create an app store for our device, for our piece of software or anything, or for our service platform. Why? Well, because they looked at Apple's margin, and they looked at the fact that Apple managed to convince the world that it's okay to pay 30% of your sale to someone who is providing a platform. Now, that's a fantastic margin. Of course, I want to go there as a company. I want to charge 30% for having created a platform at 10 years ago. So that's a very, very nice thing. I think in blockchains, if you think like this, you will end up with a certain problem, because the operation of a chain is not what's creating the value. That's just a part of it. The initiation of a chain, when you say, oh, let's create a private chain in the energy sector, for example, and you convince 10 companies in the energy supply sector to join you, then, well, you have to find a way how to make money out of this. Because quite likely charging them just to run their network, this might fly for a year or two, but after this you need to provide value, or you need to provide a way in which others which are connected to your network can provide value on the place where they are connected to your network. Because just operating the network is not going to create value. Why is this the case? Because if you create a truly decentralized platform, your platform will survive even if you decide to quit your platform. This also means that your platform will survive if 99% of your users decide to leave your platform because they don't want to pay you anymore. If your platform does not survive, you have not created a decentralized platform. You might have deluded yourself into having created one. You might have used blockchain as a marketing term to get users. That's all fair. You know, we are corporate. So in the corporate environment, all of this might be fair, but from a technical point of view, we have to be clear that this is not a decentralized system which we've created. And if you don't need a decentralized system, maybe it's best to not create one. If your business model can run on a database, on a central database, upon which you create an API on front, if that's perfectly valid for all your users, everybody is okay with it, then maybe that's the best choice. Because it's a lot easier than pushing a blockchain in somewhere. And okay, for marketing purposes, you can still run a blockchain somewhere in there, that's perfectly fine, but we have to realize that you're not building a decentralized system, but a centralized system with a little bit of marketing help. That's okay, a lot of people do this, I'm not judging you. If you want to create a real decentralized system, then you have to think about governance. And that's something which is fundamentally different and fundamentally new compared to the old style of creating software. What does governance mean in this case? Well, it means that you need to find a process for any change in your network, a documented process where the members can agree with the process, a process which is implemented in technology, how new people can join the network, how value is shared between the participants of the network. And you know, if you don't have this governance in place, you don't have a decentralized network. Because you know, the classic governance model in web server operated non-blockchain software is, I can change the code whenever I want. I operate the server, of course I can deploy a new version of the code whenever I want. I am Facebook, if I'm Facebook, I can deploy a new version. I can delete all your content whenever I want, etc. because I own this, there is no governance behind this. In a decentralized system, all these things, updating of code, changing of data, etc., extension or removal of nodes from the network need to be governed by the network, by the decentralized system. We have to answer this. For private networks, it's even further. For private networks, governance is more important than the technology you pick. Why is this the case? Because if you go to your 10 energy providers and you convince them that they should work together, because that's what blockchain is about. You need to convince people who might not necessarily trust each other because they're competitors in the market. You need to convince them that they get more out of this if they work together on some aspect of the business. Maybe because you have a cross-company business process which spans 5, 10, or 100 companies, and it's easier if you share information. If you convince them, they will ask you, well, how much does it cost? And what happens? How do you guarantee that the system runs for a certain point in time? What if you decide to move off this system in a year, etc.? So these are the real discussions we have. And if you have a clear governance process, you can tell them right from the start how this system is going to survive, even if you are out of business. And that's the only way I guess that this is the only way that you can really achieve persistent and sustainable blockchain solutions, by convincing people and by really telling them how the governance is going to work and by delivering upon the promises. If you have a governance model working, then you can change technology and your network will survive. And given the pace of technology, I think that we will have to change this. If you're creating a private chain today, I would plan for changing the technology. And you need to build this into your process right from the start. If you have a great governance model, your network will survive a change of technology. Inversely, if you have no governance model, you don't have a distributed or decentralized network. You have a centralized network, but then again, you could run it on a database, put an API in front, and your life is so much easier. So we have to always be serious about this, about what we want to achieve with our software. So what are the 3 triggers I mentioned before? I think that mainly in public blockchains, there are 3 things which hold broad adoption back from the technology, or which hold users back from the technology in general. So what are those 3 things? Well, or why are those 3 things? I think that we need these solved so that we can get more killer apps or more viable and successful apps on a blockchain. Today, if we are realistic, on Ethereum, the only real app is speculation. Of course, there are thousands of apps, but a really successful app, there's only one which is really successful. And I'm not meaning that it's successful insofar as you get money as a speculator. I'm just saying that you have a platform for speculation. And you know, speculators can get money even if the price is falling or price is rising. And you have a great platform for speculation. I don't want speculation. I don't care about speculation. I want to go back to these initial ideas of achieving more freedom and of achieving sovereignty of my data. So what do we need to achieve this? I think there are three things. I think first and foremost, we need to find a way to manage identity and privacy on a blockchain. We are totally lacking in this. There is no privacy on Ethereum. All your transactions are public. There's no privacy on Bitcoin. I can trace all your transactions. I can trace all transactions. I don't know who you are right now, but there are enough correlation analysis running which find out a lot about transactions happening on public blockchains. Also, there is no real idea of identity management. I need to be able to, or I'd like to be able to have an identity which identifies myself, which is not tied to Facebook, Amazon, or any platform provider. Because I'd like to take the claims which are part of my identity and move them from one provider to another. I think that's essential. Because otherwise, you know, we just end up with platforms, not distributed or decentralized systems. So that's one. The second one is we need some way of decentralized key recovery. Now, all of these are things people are working on, so this is not just made up, we're just very early. We need decentralized key recovery. You know why? Because if you convince your mother or your father or any of your friends, of your non-technical friends, to spend any money on crypto and to hold cryptocurrency, they will call you up at some point in time. They'll ring you and say, at least this I can imagine this happening to me, so I always tell my parents and everybody to not invest in crypto, because otherwise they would call me up and say, Ingo, can you please contact Bitcoin to reset my password? That's not working. But the problem is that's the default. We have educated our users for 25 years that password recovery is possible. The default assumption of a user is that you can recover passwords. They don't protect their private keys if they don't know what they are doing. That's the default assumption. So we need to somehow be able to deliver on this default assumption. It's not going to be easy, but if we don't, we'll have a problem, because I'll still continue to tell my parents and everybody I know on the non-tech side to not do any work with the blockchain-based system because they don't have the means to safeguard their private key for a long time. Now, what does this mean? We are not talking about blockchain just for payment here or just for speculation here, because if you're a speculator and if you put 100,000 euros in cryptocurrencies, then you know that you have to safeguard your private keys. But if blockchain should become pervasive and ubiquitous and we use them for a lot of things, then we need to solve the default assumption of being able to recover information. If all your I don't know, if the fact that you own a certain piece of land is stored on a blockchain, as Dubai is starting it today, or if your university certificates are on a blockchain, as some university in Switzerland are starting it or are already doing it, then you have a private key to this information. This private key is used that you can prove to somebody that you own this piece of land or that you have this certificate. You don't give them the private key, of course, but you can run a zero knowledge proof, or you can show them the public key that this is your information. If you lose the private key, we as a society don't want you to lose the land you own, and we don't want you to lose all the certificates you did. That's not working like this. So we need to solve for this. And we don't want to have centralized key recovery. I don't trust a central point to recover my private key. I wouldn't want to give my private key to a bank and say, oh, if I lose it, please give it back to me. Because this would mean that the other party could impersonate myself in any kind of transaction without me being able to prove. So we need to find ways to decentralize key recovery. Maybe, you know, splitting a key upon multiple parts, and combining banks, government institutions, maybe the schools, etc., maybe Facebook, maybe social networks, and if enough parties come together to prove that I am Ingo Rammer, then the combined information should allow me to recover my key. That's something people are working on, and I think we need to solve this. And the third one, and the most controversial one when I talk about this, is that I believe that we need reliable stable coins. A stable coin is a cryptocurrency coin which is pegged one-to-one to fiat currency. So basically you have a digital euro or a digital US dollar. And when I call them reliable, I'm referring to the fact that there are a number of stable coins today. The MakerDAO has a stable coin for US dollar. but I think they are non-reliable at the current state, because if a big attack would happen by an investor who wants to kill somebody out of a monetary system, as happened in the past with real monetary systems, then the funding behind these existing coins is way too low to be able to defend against this attack. So they might be stable in certain conditions, but they will fall apart immediately as soon as they are attacked by somebody who has a real interest in attacking them. I think what we need is, we need to find, in addition to cryptocurrency, existing cryptocurrency, we need to convince central banks, or they will convince themselves, to guarantee a crypto token in the same way they guarantee paper cash today. Just in addition, not as a replacement for non-fiat cryptocurrencies, but in addition. Because this enables a lot of business-to-business use cases, and especially business-to-retail use cases, where you want to have a problem solved on a blockchain, which ties back to real money transfer. And you know what you don't want? You don't want to have to deal with devaluation changes in blockchains. Just look at the last week. I don't know, some currencies major currencies have lost 20% more and more within a few days. That's not something my parents want to deal with if they just want to, I don't know, transfer money somewhere. That's not what we want to deal with. We're doing it today because speculation is the killer app. Okay, I've been talking about this to everyone. I've spoken about blockchain for quite a while. People who wanted to hear about this, and a lot of people who didn't want to hear about this, but I told everybody. And the nice thing is, 6 days ago, Christine Lagarde of the International Monetary Fund spoke at a conference in Singapore, at a financial conference in Singapore, and said that we are now approaching, from the IMF is now approaching central banks to talk with them about providing digital currency in addition to cash currency. So it's starting. And I think if these three things happen, the adoption for the broad adoption for retail customers will skyrocket. This will be, what we're seeing today is nothing. And that's not going to be slow, because as soon as these three are solved, that's going to be extremely fast. There's going to be an audible boom, which you can hear when the adoption starts. Okay, so what should you do next? Well, at first I'd recommend that you focus on decentralization, not blockchain. When you talk about your project and want to convince somebody that you have a great project, convince them that decentralization is great, not necessarily that blockchain is great. If you convince them that blockchain is great, you're riding the marketing hype somewhere. If you want to convince me, you have to convince me why you are doing decentralization right, because these are the projects which will survive in the long run. I'd also recommend that you observe the three triggers, because as soon as they happen, maybe not even all of them, as soon as we have key recovery and stable coins, a lot of use cases will start. And as soon as we have privacy and key recovery, a lot of things will start. But as soon as we have all three, the speed will be dramatic. In the meantime, I would look into what you can get from private chains today. And because they help you to provide value in a B2B scenario. But they only solve for efficiency. We have to remember this. They only solve for efficiency. And if you go for public chains, you have to remember that all of these are evolving. Everybody is learning here. So most importantly, you have to remember that we have a duty to educate people. We have a duty to learn, to discuss, to share our knowledge, because nobody else is going to do it. If we are not going to do it, nobody else is going to do it. So, well, there's a lot to learn, and we have a great conference here, so let's get started. Thank you very much.